Every time you volunteer a personal detail, you hand someone a future advantage. Not because they are evil, but because information, once given, can be stored, interpreted, and used in ways you will never see coming. If you have ever shared something casually and later felt it reframed, repeated, or subtly turned against you, you have already experienced the cost. Most losses of influence do not arrive through confrontation. They accumulate through exposure, a fear mentioned in passing, a weakness explained too thoroughly, a story told to fill silence. Each piece feels harmless on its own. Together, they create a profile. There are rules beneath oversharing that most people ignore. Patterns about timing, leverage, and perception. Once you see them, restraint stops feeling antisocial and starts feeling strategic. Power rarely vanishes in a single moment. It doesn't collapse with noise or announce its exit. Most of the time, it slips away quietly. A detail here, an explanation there, a story shared too early, too freely, to someone who never asked for it. Nothing feels stolen. Nothing feels wrong. That is how the leak begins. Think about how often people speak without being prompted, how quickly silence is filled, how a pause now feels awkward, even suspicious. Conversations drift into confessions. Small talk turns personal. Social media blurs the line between expression and exposure. What used to be private is now framed as honesty. What used to be restraint is rebranded as fear. This shift didn't happen by accident. Somewhere along the way, vulnerability was repackaged. Not as a personal choice, but as a moral expectation. You are encouraged to explain yourself, to share your struggles, to narrate your inner life in real time. And if you don't, something must be wrong. You must be hiding. You must be insecure. You must be pretending. But notice the pattern. The more someone explains who they are, the less space they occupy. The more they disclose, the easier they become to read, to predict, to interrupt. Information feels neutral, but it isn't. It changes how others position themselves around you. It gives context where none was requested. It invites judgment before trust has been earned. Most people don't overshare because they are careless. They overshare because it feels safe, because it feels connective, because withholding feels rude in a culture that rewards openness and punishes ambiguity. Silence now creates tension. Restraint invites questions. So people talk, not to communicate, but to relieve discomfort. And that discomfort matters, because power often lives inside what you don't say, in the unanswered question, in the detail that remains yours, in the ability to sit inside a moment without offering yourself up for inspection. When everything is shared, nothing carries weight. When every thought is spoken, none of them land. This is not an argument for coldness or deception. It's an observation, a quiet one. That something essential gets diluted when personal details are given away casually, without intention, without timing. Authority erodes not through confrontation, but through over-availability. If sharing were truly harmless, restraint wouldn't feel so difficult. It wouldn't create this low-grade anxiety, this urge to clarify, justify, and explain. The fact that silence now feels unnatural should make you pause, because leaks don't announce themselves. They blend into the background, and by the time you notice the loss, it already feels normal. There was a time when privacy was not treated as distance or defensiveness. It was understood as position. Information moved slowly then. It traveled through rooms, letters, and trusted messengers. Because of that, it carried weight. To know something was to hold leverage. To reveal something was to make a decision, not a reflex. Personal details were not shared casually because they did not need to be. Silence was not awkward. It was expected. Look at the pattern, not the names. In courts and councils, the most powerful figures spoke last or not at all. Their restraint created gravity. Others adjusted their tone around it. Words were chosen carefully because once spoken, they could not be taken back. Mystery was not a branding tactic. It was a byproduct of self-control. In diplomacy, what was left unsaid mattered as much as what was declared. Ambiguity protected advantage. Clear intentions were revealed only when timing demanded it. The ability to withhold was treated as intelligence, not insecurity. To expose everything was to negotiate from a weaker position. Even socially, privacy functioned as insulation. Status was reinforced by distance, not accessibility. The less someone explained themselves, the less others felt entitled to question them. Personal life was not public currency. It was private territory. Boundaries were assumed, not negotiated in real time. What's striking is how unfamiliar this now feels. Today, openness is framed as virtue by default. Silence invites suspicion. Privacy is interpreted as hiding. You are expected to narrate your thoughts, clarify your intentions, and disclose your inner life preemptively. Not because anyone explicitly demands it, but because the environment subtly rewards those who comply. The shift is not moral, it's structural. Systems that benefit from predictability encourage disclosure. The more people explain themselves, the easier they are to categorize, the easier they are to manage. When personal information flows freely, control becomes diffuse. It feels empowering to share, but it quietly redistributes leverage outward. What was once earned through trust is now volunteered through habit. What once required time and proximity is now offered instantly to strangers. Context collapses, boundaries soften, and the individual adapts, often without realizing what is being traded. This is not about returning to secrecy or romanticizing the past. It's about recognizing a constant that hasn't changed. Power has always been tied to control over information, especially personal information. The ability to decide what is revealed when and to whom. When that control weakens, so does position. Not dramatically, gradually. The past understood something that modern culture tends to overlook. Privacy was never about isolation. It was about authorship, about choosing your exposure rather than reacting to pressure. When that choice disappears, power doesn't vanish. It just stops belonging to you. At the center of all this is something deeply human. The need to be seen, not admired, not praised, just understood. Most people don't share personal details to gain leverage or attention. They do it to reduce friction, to prevent misunderstanding before it happens, to make sure others see them correctly. There is comfort in being legible, in knowing that your intentions have been clarified and your inner world has been made visible. The problem is not the impulse, it's what the impulse slowly reshapes. Over time, identity begins to move outward. Instead of being something you inhabit, it becomes something you manage. A negotiation between who you feel you are and how you hope others perceive you. Words become tools of stabilization. Explanations become emotional insurance. You talk, not because you are unsure of yourself, but because you are afraid others might be. This is where the paradox emerges. The more someone explains who they are, the more they signal that their position is still open for discussion, not intentionally, psychologically. Certainty has a different texture. It doesn't rush to clarify. It doesn't chase alignment. It stands without commentary. And because of that, it feels solid. When explanations multiply, solidity dissolves. Not because the person is dishonest or confused, but because they are inviting external confirmation to complete an internal structure. Identity begins to depend on response, on being received correctly, on reassurance. And reassurance is addictive. Each explanation feels relieving in the moment. Attention releases. A misunderstanding is preempted, but the relief doesn't last. The environment resets. New people appear. New contexts form, and the need to explain returns, slightly stronger than before. This is how oversharing becomes a habit rather than a choice. There is also a quiet fear underneath it. The fear of being misread, of being reduced to a label, of having your silence filled by someone else's assumptions. So you speak first. You narrate. You define yourself before others can. But perception is uncontrollable. No amount of explanation can secure it. The more you try, the more you become reactive to it. Identity becomes porous. Boundaries soften. Authority leaks through emotional exposure. This is not a moral failure. It's a coping strategy. One that makes sense in a world that rewards visibility and punishes ambiguity. A world where misunderstanding feels dangerous and silence feels risky. That's why this pattern is so widespread. And that's why it's uncomfortable to look at closely. Because recognizing it means confronting a difficult possibility. that some of the clarity we seek through sharing may actually be costing us the stability we're trying to protect. This is where the pattern becomes harder to ignore. Every time a personal detail is shared, something changes hands, not emotionally, structurally. Information leaves your control and enters an environment where it can be interpreted, remembered, reframed, or used in ways you no longer direct. This is not about bad intentions, it's about dynamics. In any interaction, the person who knows less retains more flexibility. They can respond later, adjust their position, change their tone. The person who has revealed more has already narrowed their options. They have committed to a version of themselves that now exists outside their control. This is what leverage actually looks like. Not dominance, not manipulation, optionality. In workplaces, this plays out quietly. The colleague who explains their stress, their doubts, their personal struggles may feel momentarily understood. But that information doesn't disappear. It becomes context. It shapes how their confidence is interpreted, how their mistakes are framed, how their reliability is assessed. Meanwhile, the person who keeps their inner world private is judged primarily on outcomes. In relationships, oversharing is often confused with intimacy. But intimacy is mutual and paced. Oversharing is unilateral and premature. When one person reveals more faster, the balance shifts. They invest emotional capital before trust has been built to hold it. What was meant to create closeness can create asymmetry. Online, the effect is amplified. Personal details are stripped of context and preserved indefinitely. A moment of honesty becomes a permanent reference point. The story no longer evolves with you. It freezes, and others are free to return to it whenever it suits them. Once shared, information stops belonging to you. It belongs to interpretation. People don't need to be manipulative for this to matter. They only need to remember, to categorize, to unconsciously adjust how they treat you. This is why disclosure is never neutral. It changes the field. Silence, by contrast, preserves space. It allows you to move without dragging a narrative behind you. It gives you room to adapt, to redefine yourself through action rather than explanation. This is why power is so often mistaken for confidence or assertiveness. But those are surface traits. Underneath them is something quieter. The ability to withhold, to decide what remains unspoken, to let others operate with incomplete information. When everything is disclosed, options collapse. You can't unsay what's been said. You can't unshare what's been offered. And you can't control how it will be used later. This is not a call to secrecy or emotional withdrawal. It's a recalibration. A recognition that personal information has weight, that where it goes matters. That timing matters. Power does not come from dominating conversations. It comes from retaining choice, from knowing that what you don't reveal keeps doors open. That silence is not emptiness, but reserve. Once you see disclosure this way, it becomes harder to treat it casually, because you begin to understand that every detail shared is not just a moment of honesty. It's a decision about where your leverage lives. By this point, it should be clear that oversharing is not just a personal habit. It's a response to an environment that quietly trains it. Modern systems do not force disclosure. They reward it, consistently, predictably, and over time. Rewards shape behavior more effectively than pressure ever could. Platforms are built around visibility. The more personal the content, the more engagement it attracts. Emotion travels faster than restraint. Confession outperforms composure. Stories that expose struggle, vulnerability, and identity are amplified, not because they are true, but because they hold attention. Attention is the currency. Personal stories are the raw material. Media follows the same pattern. Intimacy is framed as authenticity. Private life becomes narrative fuel. The line between expression and extraction blurs. What feels like self-expression often functions as data. Emotion becomes signal. Disclosure becomes input. None of this requires malicious intent. Systems don't need to manipulate individuals directly. They only need to align incentives. When openness is rewarded with validation, reach, or belonging, people adapt, gradually, almost invisibly. Social norms shift as a result. Oversharing becomes normalized. Withholding begins to look abnormal. Silence feels suspicious. Privacy is reframed as distance, and the individual adjusts, not because they want to be exposed, but because they want to remain connected. This is where psychology and infrastructure intersect. The human need to be seen meets a system designed to capture attention. The result is a feedback loop. You share, you receive response. The response reinforces the behavior. Over time, the impulse to disclose feels internal, even natural, but it has been shaped. The unsettling part is not that systems benefit from exposure. It's that people begin to regulate themselves on behalf of those systems. They preemptively share. They explain themselves without being asked. They convert inner life into outward content. And because this happens gradually, it rarely feels like loss. It feels like participation. But participation has a cost. The more of yourself that exists publicly, the less remains under your control. Identity becomes legible, predictable, easy to slot into categories. The very thing that feels expressive reduces flexibility. This is not a warning about technology. It's a pattern that would emerge in any environment that rewards exposure. Incentives shape behavior regardless of intention. The discomfort comes from realizing that some of your urges may not be entirely yours, that the instinct to explain, share, and expose might be less about honesty and more about adaptation, a response to what is consistently rewarded. And once you see that, it becomes harder to ignore the question beneath it. If systems reward exposure, who benefits from restraint disappearing? Because power has never been about who speaks the loudest. It has always belonged to those who can choose when not to speak at all. Silence did not become threatening on its own. It became threatening because the world around it changed. In a culture built on disclosure, participation is assumed. People are expected to explain themselves, share their thoughts, and reveal their inner states as a form of social cooperation. When someone doesn't do this, it breaks the rhythm. The exchange feels incomplete, and that gap creates discomfort. Silence offers no data, no emotional cues, no narrative to respond to. Faced with that absence, people begin to project. They fill in the blanks with their own assumptions, arrogance, dishonesty, emotional distance. The silent person is judged not for what they do, but for what others imagine they might be withholding. This reaction says more about the observer than the person being observed. In informal social hierarchies, information is how positions are negotiated. Who knows what? Who reveals what? Who aligns with whom? When someone opts out of that process, even quietly, they become harder to place, harder to manage, harder to predict. Unreadability disrupts the flow. This is why restraint often provokes stronger reactions than openness. Oversharing reassures. It signals compliance with the social script. Silence refuses that reassurance. It doesn't offer context. It doesn't invite interpretation. And in a system that relies on constant signaling, that feels destabilizing. People often describe silent individuals as intimidating, cold, or untrustworthy, but rarely consider another possibility, that the discomfort comes from a loss of control. When someone doesn't explain themselves, others lose the ability to categorize them quickly. The familiar shortcuts no longer work. This is where insecurity reveals itself. Those who are comfortable with ambiguity rarely feel threatened by silence. They don't need immediate access to someone's inner world to feel stable. But in environments where status and belonging are negotiated through disclosure, silence becomes a refusal to play along. It's important to notice that silence does not assert dominance. It simply preserves boundaries. Yet those boundaries can feel like barriers to people who rely on information to orient themselves. That is why silence is often interpreted as an attack, even when none is intended. The irony is that restraint is often read as confidence, not because it is performative, but because it does not seek validation. It does not rush to be understood. It allows misunderstanding to exist without correcting it. And that tolerance is rare. In a culture where visibility equals participation, choosing not to reveal becomes a quiet act of resistance. Not loud enough to be noticed immediately, but strong enough to unsettle established patterns. Once you understand this, reactions to silence become easier to read. They are not responses to secrecy. They are responses to uncertainty. And uncertainty for many people is far more threatening than any personal detail you could have shared. At this point, a distinction needs to be made clearly. Without theatrics or defensiveness, silence is not secrecy. Privacy is not deception. Withholding personal information is not the same as hiding truth. These ideas only blur together when intention is ignored. Secrecy is about concealing in order to mislead. Discipline is about choosing what does not require exposure. One manipulates the external world. The other governs the internal one. This difference matters. Restraint does not exist to control how others behave. It exists to preserve clarity, to prevent unnecessary leakage, to keep personal information aligned with purpose rather than impulse. Silence, in this sense, is not an act performed outward. It is a boundary held inward. Most oversharing is not driven by honesty. It is driven by anxiety. The anxiety of being misunderstood, of being excluded, of not being seen correctly. Discipline intervenes at that moment, not by suppressing truth, but by asking a quieter question. Does this need to be shared now? With this person? For this reason? Often the answer is no. Expression has its place. Vulnerability has its place. But when expression becomes reflexive, it stops being expressive. It becomes leakage. Information exits without intention, and what leaves cannot be recalled. Discipline restores choice. This is why restraint feels different from secrecy. There is no tension in it, no guarding, no performance. The person who is disciplined does not appear evasive because they are not calculating. They are simply not compelled. Silence, when grounded in discipline, is stable. It does not shift based on audience. It does not demand reaction. It does not need to be explained. This is also where ethics re-enter the conversation. Using silence to manipulate others corrodes trust. Using silence to avoid accountability weakens character. But using silence to avoid unnecessary exposure is neither. It is self-respect expressed quietly. The world often conflates these because it benefits from exposure. But clarity requires separation. Not everything withheld is hidden. Not everything shared is honest. Restraint is not about being mysterious. It is about being deliberate. When you stop speaking out of impulse, you begin to notice how often words were filling space rather than serving meaning. How often explanations were offered to relieve discomfort rather than communicate truth. Discipline does not silence you. It returns authorship. And that is why this distinction matters. Because the power preserved by restraint is not power over others. It is power over your own boundaries, over what you offer, over what remains yours. Without that control, silence becomes fear. With it, silence becomes alignment. Reclaiming power does not begin with strategy. It begins with attention. Not attention directed outward, toward how you are being received, but inward toward the impulse to speak, the moment before explanation, the moment before disclosure, the subtle urge to fill space. In that pause, something becomes visible. There are moments when silence preserves dignity, when nothing needs to be added. A question goes unanswered, not out of defiance, but because no answer is required. An assumption passes without correction, because your sense of self does not depend on immediate alignment. In those moments, identity stabilizes. It stops reaching outward for confirmation. It becomes something you carry rather than perform. Fewer words change presence, not because silence is impressive, but because it is grounded. When you are not constantly narrating yourself, others begin to respond to what you do, not what you say about it. Action regains its weight. This does not require withdrawal from the world. It requires a different relationship with it. Transparency has taught people to externalize their inner life, to treat every thought as potential content, every feeling as something to be shared. But not everything real needs to be visible to exist. Some things gain strength by remaining unspoken. There is a quiet relief in realizing that you do not owe constant access to yourself, that you can participate without exposing, engage without explaining, be present without being revealed. This is not about appearing powerful. It is about feeling coherent. When your inner world is not constantly leaking outward, it settles. Decisions become cleaner, reactions slow. You stop rehearsing explanations that may never be needed. Power emerges as a byproduct of that alignment, not because others are impressed, but because you are no longer negotiating yourself in real time. The world will continue to reward exposure. That will not change. But you are not required to optimize for every incentive. You can choose a quieter posture, one that values clarity over immediacy. This posture does not make you invisible. It makes you deliberate. Over time, this changes how you experience interaction. Conversations feel less draining. Social spaces feel less demanding. You speak when something needs to be said, not when silence feels uncomfortable. And something subtle happens. People begin to listen more closely, not because you are withholding information, but because when you do speak, it carries intention. A transparent world will always pressure you to reveal. Reclaiming power does not mean resisting loudly. It means deciding privately. It means allowing some parts of yourself to remain intact, unshared, unexplained, not because they are fragile, but because they are finished. In that quiet completion, something returns, a sense that you belong to yourself again. And from that place, engagement becomes a choice rather than a reflex. That is what power looks like now. Not control over others, but custody of your own inner life. Nothing around you has changed. The world is still loud. It still rewards exposure. Stories are still shared freely. Opinions still circulate faster than reflection. The pressure to explain, to reveal, to be understood immediately remains exactly where it was. What changes is subtler. Your relationship to disclosure shifts. You begin to notice when words are offered out of habit rather than necessity. When explanations are given to soothe discomfort rather than convey truth. When personal details move outward before they have settled inward. And in noticing, something loosens. Power does not return in confrontation. It does not arrive through dominance, secrecy, or withdrawal. It returns through access, through the quiet decision that not everything requires an audience. When you stop volunteering your inner life for inspection, you reclaim authorship. You choose what remains private not out of fear, but out of completeness. Silence becomes less about withholding and more about alignment. Stillness emerges not as emptiness, but as coherence. You no longer feel the need to correct every assumption, to narrate every intention, to stabilize perception through constant explanation. You allow some misunderstandings to exist without rushing to resolve them. And the world adjusts, not dramatically, not all at once, but subtly. Interactions slow, presence deepens. Words, when spoken, land with more weight because they are no longer compensating for absence. This is not a victory over noise. The noise continues. This is a return to center. Power in this sense is not something you accumulate. It is something that stops leaking. It was never taken from you. It was given away incrementally through habits that felt harmless, through disclosures that felt human, through explanations that felt polite. Reclaiming it does not require a new persona or a hardened exterior. It requires a quieter posture, one that trusts internal clarity more than external validation. The final realization is simple, and that is what makes it unsettling. Control does not come from managing others, it comes from managing access to yourself. When you understand that, stillness no longer feels empty. It feels owned, and in that ownership, something shifts. Not outwardly, internally. The world keeps moving. You remain where you are. And for the first time in a long while, that feels like enough.